Dewey De La Fan Story Intro Theo Dung Yu Ka Kwa Ban. Edit The CEO fired a single dad over a $1 bolt. She never expected to lose $1.2 billion. What could possibly connect a single $1 bolt to a loss measured in billions? And how can one decision carry consequences far beyond what anyone first imagined? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with dignity, justice, and unforgettable turning points, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for being here and for supporting this community with your time, kindness, and encouragement. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you think one small decision can truly change everything? Now, settle in as we step into the beginning of a story where appearances can be deceiving and every choice carries unexpected weight. Sometimes the smallest thing in a company isn't the cheapest part. It's the piece holding everything together. The conference room on the 32nd floor of Brooks Dynamics overlooked downtown Chicago through walls of flawless glass, where the morning sun reflected off steel towers and painted long ribbons of light across a polished walnut table. Executives in tailored suits lined both sides, tablets glowing, quarterly forecasts stacked neatly before them, while the quiet hum of climate control blended with the faint aroma of fresh coffee and expensive leather. At the far end sat Evelyn Brooks, 39 years old, the youngest CEO in the company's history, admired by investors for her relentless efficiency and feared by employees for never tolerating what she called unnecessary resistance. Numbers, she believed, never lied. Emotions usually did. Across the room stood Ethan Walker, a 44-year-old single father whose blue maintenance uniform looked strangely out of place among luxury watches and designer jackets. His hands carried the faint marks of years spent solving problems most people never noticed. He wasn't loud. He wasn't polished. He simply held a small stainless steel bolt between two fingers as though it deserved the same respect everyone else had already dismissed. "It's just a $1 part," one vice president muttered with a laugh. Another executive leaned back in his chair and smiled. "We're delaying production over that." Quiet chuckles drifted across the room. Ethan didn't react. He had spent years learning that pride spoken too quickly often drowned out wisdom whispered patiently. He looked toward Evelyn and spoke with calm certainty. "This isn't about the price. It's about the tolerance rating." Evelyn folded her hands together. "Our suppliers certified the replacement." Ethan nodded once. "The paperwork says it meets the minimum specification." "Then what's the problem?" she asked. His eyes rested briefly on the bolt before meeting hers again. "Minimum isn't the same as safe." The room grew still for only a heartbeat before another manager sighed dramatically. "We're losing nearly $200,000 every hour this line stays idle." Someone tapped a calculator. Someone else shook his head. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to irritation. Evelyn rose from her chair with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed thousands of lives before lunch. "Mr. Walker," she said evenly, "your responsibility is maintenance, not executive policy." Ethan answered without raising his voice. "My responsibility is making sure people can trust what leaves this building." A few eyes rolled. One executive whispered, "He's making this personal." Evelyn's expression never changed. "Replace the bolt." Ethan remained perfectly still. "I can't authorize that." Silence settled across the room, heavier now than the laughter that had filled it moments earlier. Outside the towering windows, traffic continued flowing through the city as if nothing extraordinary had happened, while inside, every eye remained fixed on two people standing on opposite sides of authority. Evelyn inhaled slowly before speaking words that sounded almost routine. "Then you're refusing a direct order." Ethan answered with the same quiet composure that had carried him through years of hardship after losing his wife and raising his daughter alone. "I'm refusing to sign something I believe is wrong." The decision came without hesitation. "Turn in your badge. Effective immediately, you're terminated." No one spoke. Ethan looked down at the identification badge clipped to his faded uniform, unclipped it carefully, and placed it on the conference table without anger or argument. He gave a respectful nod to everyone in the room, picked up his worn toolbox, and walked toward the elevator with steady footsteps that echoed softly through the silent hallway. Behind him, the meeting resumed within seconds. Spreadsheets reopened. Forecasts continued. Production schedules moved forward. Only the forgotten $1 bolt remained on the polished table, catching a narrow beam of sunlight that no one bothered to notice. Ethan Walker stepped out of the downtown office tower just as the crisp Chicago breeze swept between the buildings, carrying the distant sound of traffic and the rhythmic rumble of an elevated train somewhere above the streets. He paused for only a moment, lifted his face toward the bright autumn sky, and slipped the empty badge clip into his jacket pocket before walking toward the parking garage without looking back. There was no anger in his expression, no dramatic gesture, only the quiet discipline of a man who had learned years ago that disappointment could never be allowed to arrive home before he did. His aging pickup truck waited in the same corner space where it had sat every weekday for nearly 12 years. The faded blue paint had long surrendered its shine, and the driver's side mirror carried a thin crack that Ethan had never bothered to replace because it still worked. He climbed inside, rested both hands on the steering wheel, and closed his eyes for a slow breath before starting the engine. His first thought was not about losing his job. It was about his daughter. Lily Walker was 11 years old, thoughtful beyond her age, with sandy blonde hair that never stayed neatly tied back for more than an hour and curious blue eyes that reminded Ethan every day of the woman he had loved and lost. Every afternoon at exactly 3:30, Lily waited outside Lincoln Elementary with a backpack nearly as large as she was, scanning every passing vehicle until she spotted her father's old truck. No matter how difficult the day had been, Ethan always made sure his smile reached her before his worries did. As he drove through familiar neighborhoods lined with brick homes and maple trees beginning to glow with shades of amber and crimson, his phone vibrated gently on the passenger seat. The school reminder flashed across the screen. Parents' Science Night. 6 o'clock. Do not forget. Ethan smiled faintly. He had promised Lily they would build the bridge model together that evening using popsicle sticks, glue, and the small toolbox she proudly called hers. Missing that promise had never been an option. The hardware store stood only a few blocks from the school, and Ethan stopped to buy the extra craft supplies she had circled in the flyer. The young cashier glanced at his work uniform and asked, "Long day?" Ethan answered with the same calm kindness that often surprised strangers. "Every day teaches something." She smiled politely, unaware that the sentence carried more truth than either of them realized. When he arrived at Lincoln Elementary, children poured through the front entrance laughing, backpacks bouncing against their shoulders as parents waved from the pickup lane. Lily spotted the familiar truck almost instantly and ran over with a grin bright enough to erase every trace of the morning. "Daddy," she called happily as she climbed inside. "Guess what? My bridge held 23 pounds today before it finally broke." Ethan laughed softly. "That is impressive engineering." She beamed with pride before noticing the missing company badge that normally rested on his shirt. Her smile faded only slightly. "Did you forget your badge at work?" Ethan glanced at her for a brief second before easing the truck back onto the road. "No," he answered gently. "I do not work there anymore." Lily remained quiet, watching the passing streets through the window. After several long seconds, she asked the only question that truly mattered. "Are we going to be okay?" Ethan reached across the seat and squeezed her hand with steady reassurance. "We have each other. That has carried us through harder days than this one." Lily nodded slowly, accepting the answer without another word. Outside, the afternoon sunlight settled warmly across the windshield, while somewhere far behind them, inside the towering headquarters of Brooks Dynamics, production managers confidently approved the installation of the replacement bolt, believing they had just solved a costly delay without realizing they had quietly set something far more expensive into motion. The following morning arrived with the quiet confidence of routine, but inside Brooks Dynamics, routine had already begun to unravel in ways no spreadsheet could predict. Production Line 7 came alive before sunrise as conveyor belts rolled steadily beneath bright industrial lights, and robotic arms moved with perfect mechanical rhythm. Engineers watched digital dashboards filled with green status indicators, while supervisors exchanged satisfied nods. The replacement bolt had been installed overnight exactly as instructed. On paper, every specification appeared acceptable. In reality, something almost invisible had changed. At 8:15, a vibration sensor recorded a reading only slightly above its normal range. The alert appeared briefly on a technician's monitor before disappearing into a growing stream of routine notifications. Probably calibration drift, someone remarked before clearing the warning with a single click. 20 minutes later, another sensor reported an unusual alignment variance. This time, the software compensated automatically, allowing production to continue without interruption. Nobody considered stopping the line because every minute of operation represented thousands of dollars in revenue. Upstairs, Evelyn Brooks entered the executive floor carrying her usual confidence. Investors were arriving that afternoon for a major demonstration of the company's newest manufacturing platform, a project expected to secure contracts worth more than $1 billion over the coming years. Every presentation slide had been polished. Every financial projection had been rehearsed. Every executive expected another successful day. Evelyn paused outside the conference room as her chief financial officer smiled. Production is back on schedule. We made the right decision. Yesterday, she answered with quiet satisfaction. Results always speak louder than opinions. Meanwhile, several floors below, senior quality engineer Daniel Foster studied a live equipment report with growing concern. He frowned as another subtle vibration pattern appeared. "That is strange," he whispered to himself. He walked toward the production floor, listening carefully. Most people heard nothing beyond the familiar rhythm of automated machinery. Daniel heard something different. A faint metallic pulse repeating every few seconds, soft enough to escape casual attention, but steady enough to trouble an experienced ear. He asked a maintenance supervisor, "Did Ethan Walker review this installation?" The supervisor hesitated before answering. "He is gone." Daniel looked up. "Gone. Terminated yesterday." Silence settled between them. Daniel remembered working beside Ethan for nearly a decade. Whenever Ethan warned about a component, he never guessed. He measured. He tested. He verified. More importantly, he never argued to protect his pride. He argued only when safety or reliability stood at risk. Daniel opened the maintenance database and searched Ethan's previous inspection records. Hundreds of detailed notes appeared, each carefully documented with measurements, photographs, torque values, and long-term performance observations. One file immediately caught his attention. It described the exact assembly now running on production line 7. The final sentence stopped him cold. Replacement hardware meeting minimum commercial specification may introduce harmonic instability under continuous industrial load. Approved component requires custom tolerance exceeding standard certification. Daniel read the sentence twice before his expression changed completely. He hurried toward the operations office carrying the tablet in his hands. At nearly the same moment, another vibration warning appeared on the central monitoring system. Then another. Then another. None of them signaled immediate failure. None of them demanded an emergency shutdown. Yet together they formed a quiet pattern, almost like distant thunder before a storm. Outside the towering headquarters, the city moved through another ordinary morning. Inside Brooks Dynamics, everyone believed they were preparing for the biggest business presentation in company history. Only one person had recognized the danger before it began, and he was now miles away, helping his daughter finish a school science bridge while the smallest decision made inside a boardroom continued growing into the largest mistake the company had ever made. Daniel Foster pushed open the executive conference room doors without waiting for permission, an interruption so unusual that every conversation stopped instantly. Investors from New York and California looked up from polished presentation folders while senior executives exchanged puzzled glances. Evelyn Brooks turned toward him with measured annoyance. "Daniel, this meeting is already in progress." He placed his tablet carefully on the conference table instead of speaking immediately. "I believe we need to suspend production line 7. A vice president shook his head before Daniel could continue. "Absolutely not. We have customers arriving in less than 1 hour." Daniel met Evelyn's eyes with quiet urgency. "I found one of Ethan Walker's engineering reports from 3 years ago. It documents the exact assembly we modified yesterday." Evelyn crossed her arms. "The component was certified." "Yes," Daniel replied. "Certified for minimum commercial tolerance, not for continuous industrial load at our operating level." Another executive leaned forward impatiently. "We have been running since dawn without a shutdown." Daniel nodded. "That is exactly what worries me." The room fell silent as he opened the inspection report. Ethan's photographs appeared on the large presentation screen that had been prepared for investors only minutes earlier. Instead of colorful revenue charts, everyone now saw close-up images of steel brackets, precision measurements, and handwritten engineering notes explaining how microscopic movement could gradually amplify through thousands of operating cycles. Daniel highlighted the final paragraph. He warned that replacing this custom component with a standard certified part could create harmonic instability that would not appear immediately. It would build slowly until the entire assembly drifted outside its design limits. The chief operations officer frowned. Why was this never added to our executive maintenance summary? Daniel scrolled farther. Because Ethan filed it as a field engineering observation before the merger. The database archived it under legacy documentation. Evelyn remained composed, but her confidence had begun to soften around the edges. How certain are you? Daniel answered without hesitation. Certain enough that I would stop the line if the decision were mine. Before anyone could respond, a notification tone echoed through the room. One production supervisor called from the factory floor. We have another automatic slowdown. The control software corrected it. A second call arrived less than 1 minute later. We are seeing repeated alignment adjustments. The executives exchanged uneasy looks. Every alert by itself appeared minor. Together, they painted a picture that no longer felt ordinary. Evelyn walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manufacturing campus below. From this height, everything appeared perfectly organized. Trucks entered loading bays. Employees crossed clean walkways. Smoke rose steadily from distant utility stacks beneath a bright blue Illinois sky. It looked like success. It looked exactly the way success was supposed to look. Yet she found herself remembering Ethan's calm voice. Minimum is not the same as safe. She had dismissed the sentence yesterday as stubborn resistance. Today it sounded less like an argument and more like a warning she had chosen not to hear. Another call interrupted the silence. This time the production manager spoke more slowly. We have reduced line speed by 15%. The vibration pattern is increasing. Nobody laughed now. Nobody mentioned hourly production targets. Nobody questioned why a maintenance technician had refused to sign the work order. The room that had celebrated decisive leadership less than 24 hours earlier had become a place filled with uncertainty. And for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, Evelyn Brooks realized that the most expensive mistake a leader could make was not trusting the quiet person who understood the details everyone else considered too small to matter. By early afternoon, the first contract demonstration was scheduled to begin, but confidence inside Brooks Dynamics had quietly given way to controlled concern. Engineers gathered around monitoring stations as live performance graphs displayed subtle fluctuations that refused to disappear. Every adjustment made by the automated control system bought another few minutes of operation, yet each correction demanded a slightly larger correction after it. The pattern was no longer random. It was growing. Daniel Foster stood beside the central diagnostics screen, comparing real-time data with Ethan Walker's archived engineering notes line by line. Every prediction matched with unsettling precision. The resonance is spreading exactly the way he described, he said softly. The software is hiding the problem, not fixing it. Across the operations floor, supervisors began slowing additional production cells in an effort to reduce mechanical stress. Instead of improving, the irregular readings migrated through connected assemblies like ripples across a quiet lake. No alarms screamed. No sparks flew. The danger remained invisible to anyone who measured success only by what they could immediately see. Upstairs, the investor presentation had barely begun when a senior operations manager entered the room carrying a tablet instead of the scheduled product samples. His face revealed everything before he spoke. We have suspended shipments. The room fell silent. One investor lowered his pen. Another looked toward Evelyn Brooks with growing concern. How long will the delay last? She asked. The manager hesitated. We do not know yet. Those 5 words weighed more heavily than any financial forecast displayed on the large screen behind her. Within the next hour, customer support lines filled with calls requesting delivery updates. Distribution partners demanded explanations. Logistics teams placed outbound trucks on hold, while quality assurance reviewed inventory that had already been approved for shipment only hours earlier. Every passing minute multiplied costs that no one had anticipated the day before. The chief financial officer quietly recalculated projected losses. Production delays became contractual penalties. Contractual penalties threatened investor confidence. Investor confidence affected market value. Numbers that had looked comfortably profitable that morning now moved steadily in the opposite direction. News traveled quickly through the financial community. Analysts began asking unexpected questions during scheduled conference calls. Why had production stopped without warning? Was there a manufacturing defect? Had the company discovered a quality issue? No one inside Brooks Dynamics had complete answers because no one had expected a $1 decision to grow into a crisis touching every department. Late that afternoon, the board of directors assembled for an emergency meeting. Documents covered the conference table while legal advisors joined through secure video calls. Daniel presented Ethan's engineering report once again, this time alongside the live vibration data collected throughout the day. There was no speculation left, only evidence. One board member adjusted his glasses before asking the question that changed the atmosphere completely. Who approved replacing the original component despite this documented warning? Every eye slowly turned toward Evelyn. She did not argue. She did not blame the supplier, the maintenance department, or outdated records. She simply lowered her eyes for a brief moment as the weight of leadership settled heavily upon her shoulders. Outside the conference room, the closing bell rang on Wall Street. Within minutes, market alerts appeared across financial news services as Brooks Dynamics shares dropped sharply following reports of unexpected manufacturing disruptions. Billions of dollars in company value began disappearing faster than anyone believed possible. While miles away, Ethan Walker sat beside Lily at their small kitchen table, patiently helping her strengthen the tiny wooden bridge for her science project, completely unaware that the lesson he had tried to protect inside a factory was now being taught to an entire corporation. Long after the emergency board meeting had ended, only a handful of lights remained on inside the headquarters of Brooks Dynamics, casting pale reflections across empty hallways that had felt invincible only one day earlier. The building was unusually quiet. The confident conversations about expansion, quarterly growth, and market leadership had been replaced by whispered discussions about accountability, engineering reports, and decisions that could no longer be undone. Evelyn Brooks remained alone in the executive conference room, surrounded by printed maintenance records spread across the polished table. She had read Ethan Walker's report once, then twice, then a third time, slower than before. Every sentence carried the same careful precision that had marked his calm voice during the meeting. She now replayed endlessly in her mind. There was no emotion in his report, no accusation, no attempt to impress anyone, only measurements, calculations, long-term testing results, and a final recommendation written with remarkable restraint. It became painfully clear that he had not been protecting his own opinion. He had been protecting the company. Daniel Foster quietly entered the room carrying another archive box retrieved from the engineering records department. "I think you should see these," he said. Evelyn opened the first folder. Inside were design revisions dating back nearly 11 years, each signed by Ethan Walker. Another contained manufacturing improvements that had reduced equipment wear across multiple facilities. A third documented a redesign that had saved the company millions of dollars in maintenance costs over several years. Yet none of those reports had ever reached executive presentations because Ethan had never attached his name to the achievements beyond what company policy required. "Why did nobody tell me?" Evelyn asked softly. Daniel answered with complete honesty. "Because he never told anyone himself." They continued opening files. Patent contribution records, safety reviews, training manuals still used by new technicians. Quiet innovations that had become standard practice without most employees ever learning who had created them. Daniel stopped at one final document from before the corporate merger. "Here," he said. "This explains everything." The document identified Ethan as the lead field engineer responsible for developing the custom tolerance standards that had made Production Line 7 one of the most reliable manufacturing systems in the industry. Those standards had eventually become internal policy, but during the merger the engineering database had been reorganized, names had been separated from technical references, and years later very few people still remembered who had originally designed the system. Evelyn slowly leaned back in her chair, unable to look away from the page before her. She had believed she was dismissing a maintenance technician who refused to follow instructions. Instead, she had removed the one person who understood every hidden detail of the system better than anyone else in the company. Outside the conference room, members of the board continued discussing financial exposure. Preliminary estimates suggested the interrupted contracts, delayed shipments, market reaction, and recovery expenses could eventually exceed $1.2 billion if operations could not be fully restored within days. The number echoed through Evelyn's thoughts, yet it no longer felt like the greatest loss. The greater loss was trust. She remembered Ethan quietly placing his identification badge on the table without bitterness. She remembered him leaving with dignity while everyone else returned to business as usual. Not once had he raised his voice. Not once had he tried to embarrass anyone. His silence had not been weakness. It had been character. Evelyn closed the final folder and looked toward the dark skyline beyond the glass windows. For the first time in her career, she understood that leadership was not measured by how quickly a decision was made, but by whether the leader had the humility to recognize wisdom before it was too late. Then she stood, picked up her car keys, and made a decision that no board of directors, investor, or legal advisor could make for her. She was going to find Ethan Walker, not because the company needed an engineer, but because she finally realized she owed a good man the respect she had failed to give him. The drive across Chicago felt longer than Evelyn Brooks remembered, even though the streets were nearly empty beneath the soft glow of streetlights reflecting against the sidewalks after a brief evening rain. Her luxury sedan moved quietly through neighborhoods she had rarely visited, away from glass towers and executive offices, toward a modest street lined with small brick homes where porch lights burned warmly against the cool autumn air. The address Daniel Foster had found in the employee records ended beside a neatly maintained house with a white wooden fence that had been repaired more than once instead of replaced. There were no expensive cars in the driveway, no signs of wealth, only a weathered pickup truck and two bicycles resting beside the garage. Evelyn remained seated for a moment, looking through the windshield as uncertainty replaced the confidence that had defined her career for years. Then she stepped out, walked slowly to the front porch, and pressed the doorbell. Before anyone answered, she heard laughter drifting through the closed door. It was not loud. It was simple, genuine, and completely untouched by the financial storm consuming Brooks Dynamics. The door opened, and Lily Walker smiled politely before looking up with curious blue eyes. "Hello," she said. "Can I help you?" Evelyn hesitated for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Is your father home?" Lily nodded and turned toward the hallway. "Dad, someone is here." A moment later, Ethan appeared wearing a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. A small amount of wood glue marked one hand, and a pencil rested behind one ear. He looked surprised to see Evelyn standing on his porch, but not angry. Behind him, the dining room table was covered with popsicle sticks, rulers, bottles of glue, and the nearly completed bridge Lily had proudly described the day before. A saucepan simmered gently on the stove, filling the house with the comforting aroma of homemade chicken soup. Everything about the home spoke quietly of care instead of luxury. Ethan offered a respectful nod. "Good evening, Ms. Brooks." Evelyn searched for words that suddenly felt much heavier than any presentation she had ever delivered. "I hope I am not interrupting." Ethan glanced toward Lily, who carefully aligned another small beam on her school project. "We are almost finished with homework," he replied calmly. "Would you like to come in?" She stepped inside, noticing family photographs arranged neatly along the hallway. Some showed Lily holding science fair ribbons. Others captured camping trips beside quiet lakes, birthday cakes decorated by hand, and one older photograph of Ethan standing beside a smiling woman whose eyes looked remarkably like Lily's. Nothing inside the home suggested resentment toward life. It reflected gratitude for what remained instead of sorrow for what had been lost. Ethan motioned toward the kitchen table. "Please have a seat." Evelyn sat quietly while Lily continued working on her bridge. After a few moments, the little girl looked proudly at her father. "Daddy said every piece matters because the strongest bridge can fail if one little connection is weak." Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the tiny wooden structure. The sentence settled into the room with unexpected weight. Ethan smiled gently at his daughter. "Strength is usually built from details people do not notice." Lily nodded happily, and carried the finished bridge to the counter to let the glue dry. Silence filled the kitchen for several seconds until Evelyn finally spoke. "I came here because I owe you an apology." Ethan did not interrupt. He simply listened with the same patience he had shown throughout every difficult conversation before. Outside, a cool breeze stirred the maple leaves across the front yard while inside the small house, surrounded by ordinary moments that money could never purchase. Evelyn began to understand that true respect was earned not through authority or success, but through quiet character that remained steady even after being treated unfairly. Evelyn Brooks lowered her eyes before speaking again, and when her voice finally broke the silence, it carried none of the certainty that had once commanded boardrooms. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "I believed I understood the system because I understood the numbers. I never stopped to understand the person standing in front of me." Ethan remained seated across the kitchen table, his hands folded calmly beside the unfinished bowl of soup that had already begun to cool. He did not rush to answer because some words deserved room to settle before they were met with more words. Lily glanced between them, sensing that this conversation belonged to the adults, then smiled politely and carried her science project upstairs. As her footsteps faded, Evelyn continued. "Production has been suspended. Contracts are being delayed. Investors are losing confidence. Daniel found your engineering reports. Every warning was there." Ethan nodded gently. "I know Daniel would have looked." Evelyn looked directly at him for the first time that evening. "The company needs your help." Ethan looked toward the family photographs lining the hallway before answering. "Does the company need my help, or does it finally believe what I tried to say?" The question was not spoken with bitterness. It was quiet, honest, and impossible to avoid. Evelyn drew a slow breath. "Both." Another moment of silence filled the room while the ticking kitchen clock marked each passing second. Finally, Ethan stood and walked toward a small bookshelf near the living room window. From the top shelf, he removed a worn black notebook filled with years of handwritten sketches, calculations, maintenance observations, and engineering ideas that had never belonged to any presentation or corporate award ceremony. He placed it gently on the table. "The vibration itself is not the real problem," he explained. "It is the way the replacement changes the stress path through the entire assembly. Every automatic correction creates another imbalance somewhere else. The software delays the failure, but it also hides the warning signs." Evelyn listened without interrupting, realizing that every sentence reflected years of experience rather than opinion. Ethan opened another page showing a detailed diagram of production line 7. "If the line is completely shut down now, the affected assemblies can be inspected before permanent damage develops. The custom components must be reinstalled, and the alignment sequence has to follow the original calibration order. If someone skips even one step, the vibration will return." Evelyn stared at the notebook. "How long will it take?" Ethan answered after only a brief glance at the drawings. "If the right people work together, we can stabilize the system before tomorrow afternoon." Relief briefly appeared across Evelyn's face before disappearing as she reached into her purse and removed an envelope. "The board authorized whatever compensation you believe is fair." Ethan looked at the unopened envelope, but made no effort to touch it. Instead, he quietly pushed it back toward her. "I am not coming back because of money." She looked surprised. "Then why?" Ethan smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came from conviction rather than victory. "Because thousands of families depend on those paychecks. They did not make yesterday's decision." His words settled heavily between them. He was choosing responsibility over resentment, not because anyone had earned his forgiveness, but because innocent people should never suffer for mistakes they did not make. Evelyn slowly closed the envelope without another argument. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she understood that true leadership was standing across the table from someone who had every reason to walk away, yet still chose grace instead. As Ethan picked up his old toolbox and quietly prepared to leave with her, the small wooden bridge Lily had built rested on the kitchen counter beneath the warm light, every carefully placed connection holding firm because each tiny piece had been given the respect it deserved. The following afternoon, the atmosphere inside Brooks Dynamics was unlike anything the company had experienced before. Production Line 7 stood silent while engineers, technicians, supervisors, and executives gathered around Ethan Walker as he studied the machinery with the same quiet focus he had shown every day for more than a decade. There were no dramatic speeches and no celebration of his return. He simply opened his worn notebook, compared a series of measurements against the original calibration marks, and began assigning tasks with calm precision. "Reset this alignment first," he said to one technician. "Leave that assembly untouched until the new tolerance readings are complete." To another engineer, he added, "Do not trust the software yet. Trust the measurements." Nobody questioned his instructions. The confidence in his voice came not from authority, but from understanding. Hour by hour, the vibration readings began to fall. Sensors that had flashed warnings throughout the previous day slowly returned to stable ranges. By late afternoon, the final diagnostic report appeared on the central monitoring screen. Every critical system displayed green. A quiet wave of relief spread across the production floor. Some employees smiled. Others simply closed their eyes for a brief moment, grateful that the uncertainty had finally ended. The crisis that had threatened the future of the company had been stopped, not through pride or luck, but through patience, experience, and careful attention to details that others had overlooked. 2 days later, the entire company gathered in the main assembly hall. Employees filled every available seat while executives stood together near the front of the room. Evelyn Brooks stepped onto the stage without the polished confidence that usually accompanied public announcements. She looked across the audience before speaking slowly and clearly. Leadership requires more than making decisions. It requires listening to the people whose knowledge is earned through years of faithful work. I failed to do that. The room became completely still. She turned toward Ethan, who stood quietly among the technicians instead of beside the executives. "I owe Ethan Walker a public apology. I judged his position instead of respecting his character. I measured the cost of a part instead of the value of the person protecting this company. That mistake belongs to me." No one spoke. Even the largest room in the building seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn then announced that Ethan would immediately be reinstated with full recognition of his engineering contributions, along with a senior executive position created specifically for him. Every eye turned toward Ethan as he slowly walked to the front. He accepted the microphone with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning. "Thank you," he said gently, "but I cannot accept the position." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Ethan smiled kindly before continuing. "I have learned that my greatest responsibility is not a title. It is being the father my daughter deserves every single day. I will gladly help this company whenever I am needed, but I would rather serve as an independent engineering consultant than return to an office full-time." Evelyn nodded with genuine respect. "Then we would be honored to become your first client." Soft laughter filled the room, followed by warm applause that grew stronger with every passing second. Months later, Ethan's small engineering consulting business had become trusted by manufacturers across the country, while Brooks Dynamics rebuilt its reputation through a renewed commitment to humility, safety, and respect for every employee. One crisp autumn afternoon, Evelyn happened to drive past Lincoln Elementary just as children rushed outside after school. She watched from a respectful distance as Lily ran toward her father, who greeted her with the same warm smile that had never changed despite everything life had placed before him. As they walked home together beneath golden maple trees, Evelyn quietly realized that the greatest victory had never been saving a corporation or recovering billions of dollars. It had been discovering that true strength does not demand attention, true wisdom does not need applause, and true dignity can change an entire world simply by refusing to abandon what is right, even when no one else is willing to listen.